Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Standing Committee on Social Development. This evening we will be holding a public hearing on Bill 68, an act to amend the Child Daycare Act, which is available on the Legislative Assembly website. My name is Caitlin Cleveland. I am the member for Cam Lake and the chair of the Standing Committee on Social Development. Before we begin this evening, I'd like to give the opportunity to all members to introduce themselves, and I'll start with the member to my left.
Kevin O'Reilly, Frame Lake.
Katrina Knockleby, Great Slave.
Jane Whalen Armstrong, MLA for Murphy.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to turn it over to members joining us virtually. MLA Semler.
Lisa Semler, MLA Nuvik Twin Lakes.
Ron Bondros, MLA Decho.
Excellent. Thank you so much, members. Bill 68 received second reading in the Legislative Assembly and was referred to the Standing Committee for review on November 3rd, 2022. Bill 68 is sponsored by the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. In this bill, the Government of the Northwest Territories proposes to amend the Child Daycare Act to fully implement the NWT Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare Agreement by 1. Establishing rules for licensing and operating a child daycare facility. 2. Providing the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment the authority to create regulations respecting an early childhood educator certification process with a corresponding wage grid. And 3. Setting minimum standards on quality, care, instruction, and supervision of children in facilities outside of their home, amongst other things. As the Standing Committee on Social Development, it is our job to review and consider Bill 68 and the changes it proposes to make to the Child Daycare Act. An important part of our process is to have an opportunity to hear from you, the public. In late November, we distributed stakeholder letters, and today we are pleased to be holding a public hearing. We will consider all feedback we receive and will make a report to the Assembly on our review of Bill 68 during the upcoming session. I will now invite the Honourable R.J. Simpson, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment, to deliver any opening remarks on Bill 68. Following the Minister's remarks, committee members may make comments or pose questions related to the bill. So with that, I will turn the floor over to Minister Simpson and ask that for the record, Minister Simpson, you start by introducing both yourself and your staff that have joined you here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm R.J. Simpson, the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. I am joined by 4 witnesses today: John McDonald, Deputy Minister of Education, Culture and Employment; Shannon Barnett-Aikman, Assistant Deputy Minister of Education and Culture; Shelley Capralian, Director of Early Learning and Childcare; William Stevenson, Legislative Counsel with the Department of Justice. In December 2021, the GNWT signed the Canada-NWT Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare Agreement, in which the federal government pledged to provide additional funding to reduce barriers and transform the early learning and childcare system in the Northwest Territories. The first 5 years of the Agreement and Action Plan focus on making childcare more affordable for families, developing a qualified early childhood workforce, and establishing a strong basis for accountability. Amendments to the Child Daycare Act are required to fully implement this agreement and meet the enhanced accountability and reporting measures required by Canada. Bill 68 proposes a limited set of amendments to the Act that will provide the authority to establish a certification process and wage grid for early childhood educators, increase inclusion and demographic reporting measures, establish cost control measures, including maximum fees charged to families, introduce enhanced protection for the rights of families, including a complaints process, and update and clarify language in the Act. ECE is simultaneously working to develop the regulations necessary to bring these amendments into force. The regulations will outline the more specific details, such as schedules for maximum fees, the details required in annual and demographic reports, a code of conduct for programs, and qualification levels and minimum wages for staff. ECE anticipates areas like maximum fees, minimum wages, and reporting requirements will be impacted by several factors, such as inflation, and will require ongoing adjustments over time, making them more appropriate for inclusion within the regulations rather than the Act itself. ECE engaged early learning and childcare program operators and educators, Indigenous governments, and the NWT Early Childhood Association and the public on the proposed amendments to the Act, and will be further engaging the sector on the proposed regulations as they are developed. I'm pleased to bring forward these amendments to support the development of a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system and our government's mandate commitment to advancing universal childcare in the Northwest Territories. This concludes my opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Simpson. With that, I'd like to turn it over to committee members to ask questions, and I'd like to remind committee to pass all questions through myself as chair, and just wait until your microphone is turned on so that your audio is picked up properly. So with that, members, does anybody have any questions or comments for the minister? Emily Knockleby, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the Minister and his staff for the presentation or comments and coming before committee today. I think it's been no secret that there's been a lot of sort of controversy and issues around the rollout of this work so far and the new subsidy. Can the Minister maybe speak a little bit about how the engagement process is going to work around these next sections, the phase 2, et cetera? What kind of timelines is he looking at, or are you looking at, sorry, for that engagement? When do you expect it to be complete? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily Knockleby. Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps I can hand it to the Deputy Minister for a concise answer on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Minister McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Happy New Year to committee as well. Just with respect to the regulations, we have an approach laid out where we would begin engaging over the next 2 months. In fact, with the Early Childhood Association here, the plan is to approach the association as early as next week to begin to schedule meetings and then proceed over the next number of weeks on the first or immediate 2 regulations that we would like to discuss. And then over the balance of the next fiscal year, work on other regulations. We have some preliminary ideas of which regulations we would like to address and in which order, but we also recognize that license programs may have other ideas of prioritization, and we want to hear from the sector before proceeding with the full schedule. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister McDonald. Emily Knockleby, do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, thank you for that, and I am really glad to hear the acknowledgement of that. Perhaps what the department might think is the starting point may not be what the operators themselves think is the starting point. I guess next thing I'm really curious about, and one I heard a lot about, was the wage grid and how what the government has been implementing has been impacting the ability of the daycares and day homes to pay a living wage. Can the minister explain a bit more around like the phased approach, and when do we expect that that's going to be finished, the wage grid part? Thank you.
Thank you, Emily Knockleby. Minister Simpson?
Thank you. So the wage grid, we're looking at having that come into effect April of 2024. So there will be time to work on it. And again, for more detail, I can hand it to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Minister McDonald?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the various programs and initiatives that have been announced under the Canada-wide agreement so far, and those that have occurred over the past year, have really been linked to the Canada-wide agreement and the terms between Canada and the government of the Northwest Territories. So starting with the childcare fee reduction was challenging, and when the member spoke of some of the challenges earlier, she was probably referring to that launch of that program. That program was first because we were required to reduce fees for parents as part of the agreement. Since then, we've worked to address wages within the sector, albeit only in a temporary way, as we still have to work out the wage grid and the certification system, which is a more complicated approach that will take us more time, and will take more time for the sector to provide input into that process. So really what we're trying to do is take gradual stepwise measures that allow us to meet the terms of the agreement and will permit time for both the department and the sector to absorb the change. But we are working towards 24-25 to have the large majority of those terms completed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister McDonald. MLA O'Reilly, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So just back to the issue of public engagement on the regulations themselves. I note from the minister's opening remarks that the regulations are going to cover a number of areas like maximum fees, minimum wages, reporting requirements. And when I look at the actual bill, the areas that the regulations could cover are in, hopefully I'm going to get this right, section 47, and there's 28 different areas the minister can make regulations in. Seems like there's a lot of work that still needs to be done around these regulations, and I guess I've heard a few different dates and things targets that the department has. Is there actually like a work plan or a public document that lays this public engagement exercise out in any detail that can be shared now? Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MLA O'Reilly. Minister?
Thank you. I can let the Deputy Minister speak to some of the, how this will be communicated with the public, but I will just say that given where we are in the Assembly, we are moving this bill forward now so that we can begin work on the regulations, so that we can be, legislatively in a place that most other jurisdictions in Canada are. Most other jurisdictions in Canada already have the tools to implement the Canada-wide agreement, whereas our sector, in terms of legislatively, is not quite so mature. So by moving these forward, it now gives us time to work on these regulations over the next couple of years. If we don't bring this forward now, the next opportunity to bring in a bill forward would be in the next Assembly. So you're looking at, November of 2024 before you would have an act in place. So that is all sort of, part and parcel of the approach that we're taking. We need to get things done quickly so that then we have the time to actually work on those things. In terms of any type of public engagement and communications, I'll hand it to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Deputy Minister McDonald?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And maybe just to build off of one thing the minister said, other provinces and territories are all working on similar measures across Canada. I can point to New Brunswick as an example where their legislation already had the ability for New Brunswick to put in certain regulatory measures that allowed them to meet the terms of the agreement. So they were able to step off on April 1st of 2022 with a number of measures that we could not, and that has led to different outcomes in each jurisdiction. With respect to the member's question about our engagement, we do have an engagement plan. As I mentioned earlier, however, we are wanting to take that to primarily the Early Childhood Association, and Patricia is here. Our goal is to get their input and feedback into that, recalibrate that if necessary, and then make that public. We are planning on addressing 2 regulations between now and April 1st of 2023, and those are amendments to the existing daycare standards regulations and the creation of a new daycare funding regulation, both of which are intended to address some of those short-term measures in the Canada-wide agreement. And other regulations would be tackled over the course of the 23-24 fiscal year at the pace at which the department and the sector can absorb those change, provide feedback. And naturally, as is required in each of those regulations, we would be doing public consultations or public engagements to make sure that the public has an opportunity to provide input into those regulations. I think we would be able to share those once we've ironed out some of the particulars with the association and the sector. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister McDonald. MLA O'Reilly?
Yeah, no, thanks. Unless, I don't want anybody to go away with the impression that I don't necessarily support this bill. I think there's some good things in here, but I think it's like giving the minister, the department, a blank check when it comes to creating these regulations. There's nothing in the bill, nothing in the original legislation that requires any kind of public engagement. So, and we don't, as a government, really have a formal process for allowing for public engagement on regulations. Unless you read the Gazette and you're a legal beagle or something, but, all right. So as I understand it, there's a draft engagement plan. You're going to share it with the people in the sector, recalibrate it, then you're going to release it to the public. And I can take that as a commitment. Will there also be a formal place where the regulations are actually posted and people can comment on them, posted to a website somewhere? Is that going to be part of the public engagement process as well? Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Emily O'Reilly. Minister Simpson?
Yes, one of the steps we've taken in this government is to begin posting regulations for public comment on the GNWT engagement website. And so that is done for most regulations. There might be some minor ones that aren't posted on there, but yes, this will follow that normal engagement process that we now undertake regularly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Simpson. Next up, I have MLA Knuckleby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can the minister tell me whether or not it's the GNWT's intention to at some point start offering daycare services themselves, i.e. take over from the not-for-profit sector? Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Knuckleby. Minister?
That is absolutely not our intention. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. MLA Knuckleby?
Thank you for that. I do think there might be some people that would be reassured by that. Can the minister maybe speak a little bit more about the bridge funding, or so you're saying over the next year or so we'll be working on the wages. So can the minister explain, will day homes be without funds in the meantime? I know that our workers have been quite kind of living below the poverty line as it is, and as a result we're seeing an exodus. So I just wanted to know if there's methods in place or mechanisms in place to ensure living wages in the meantime. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Emily Knuckleby. Minister?
Thank you. So what we have done is before the wage grid is in place, because that will take some time to develop and implement, we have provided a retention incentive to all of the center-based childcare facilities in the Northwest Territories. And this is funding that is that they can flow directly to their employees how they see fit. So some centers, they might be, and perhaps instead of just saying what they might be doing, I can hand it to the department for a bit more explanation about what they know that they are doing and how that's rolling out. So perhaps the Deputy Minister can answer this. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Minister McDonald.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think to the member's question, yes, the retention incentive initiative is meant to be an interim step or a progressive step to address what the sector has identified as one of, if not its most urgent need, to provide an increased wage for early childhood educators to help stabilize the sector and ensure that staff are willing to work and continue to work in the sector, as well as to recruit new staff. So while it is not meant to address all of those challenges, it really is meant to act as an interim measure until such time as we can finalize the certification system and the wage grid and those levels, which we're scheduling to complete by 24-25. The retention incentive itself is only available for center-based programs, as the minister mentioned, and that's because center-based programs are programs that have employees and they have to provide wages to those individuals, which is a major cost driver for those licensed programs. Family day homes are a different subsection of the sector, whereas they are for-profit businesses that individuals run out of their home, and they do not have employees, and as such that retention incentive program is not targeted for them. However, there are other ECE funding programs that they are available to that portion of the sector. So I would be remiss if I didn't make it clear that there are other funding programs that they can avail themselves of. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Minister McDonald. Emily O'Reilly.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm just back onto the regulation making authority as set out in this bill. And I guess it's 47.4. This is where the minister may by order exempt any person or group of persons in a community from compliance with provisions of this act or the regulations. And that's good enough. But there's nothing in here about whether these orders are actually public. Is that going to be the case? And where would these orders actually be found? Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Emily O'Reilly. Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For that level of detail, I will see if the Deputy Minister has a response, and if not, he can redirect as he sees fit. So through you, Madam Chair, I'd like to hand it to the Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much, Minister. Deputy Minister McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually didn't hear the full provision or section that the member read, but I think for this level of detail, Director Caprelian is probably the best place to answer if it is what I think I'm hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister McDonald. And Director Caprelian, that was section 47.4. Were you able to hear the preamble by MLA O'Reilly?
Good evening. I heard that it was about whether we would post the order. I think I would benefit from him restating the question. Sorry.
Thank you very much. MLA O'Reilly, I'll pass the floor back to yourself.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So in the bill, and I think it's clause 16, there's going to be a number of new sections added to the legislation, including section 40, a new 47, and 47 brackets 4 says, and it's found on page, the last page of the bill. It says the minister may by order exempt any person or group of persons in a community from compliance with provisions of this act or the regulations. And I'm not going to read the rest of it, but so that's quite an extraordinary authority for the minister to issue an order to exempt somebody from having to comply with the act or the regulations. Are those orders public documents, and where are they going to be found? Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, MLA O'Reilly. Director Caprelian.
I'm going to go off memory because I'm trying to find where you cited it, and thank you, MLA O'Reilly, for reading a section of it for me. I believe that we haven't. I believe that that's in, to allow for some flexibility as we're developing some of the areas of work that Deputy Minister McDonald spoke to. So I don't think there's been a determination around whether those orders would be public or not, but it is to allow for flexibility.
Thank you so much. Director Caprelian, did you have something you wanted to add? No? Okay, excellent. And we do have the legislative drafter here in front of us, and so I'll pass the floor over to yourself. I did see your hand go up. Go ahead.
Sure, yeah, if I can just address kind of the, where this came from. Currently, this is actually an existing provision of the Child Day Care Act under current section. This is current section. So the current section of the Act is 38. Subsection 3. So the same provision exists. It's just been renumbered. And since these are orders that would be made by the minister, they are published in the Gazette. So they are made publicly available on the Department of Justice website.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stevenson. MLA O'Reilly, do you have a follow-up question?
Okay, well, I guess that seems to be maybe more of a policy matter. I guess I know we're dealing with this in the context of another bill from the same minister, and I just want to encourage the minister and staff, I guess, within the Department of Justice that do drafting, that we have this open government policy, and by default and by design, we're supposed to be making sure that government decisions, things like orders are the default is that this stuff is public, and that it should be drafted as such and put into the bill in that way, that these kind of important decisions, as rare as they may be, are public documents. So I just want to encourage the minister and people in Department of Justice to start to use the open government policy as a lens when it comes to drafting legislation and making sure that important decisions are made public. Thanks.
You, Emily O'Reilly. Minister, I'll pass the floor back to yourself.
Thank you, and I completely agree. I'm very much in favor of transparency. I know, especially during my time as a regular member, I would be looking for information and it would be nowhere to be found. And even in my 7 years here in the Assembly, I've seen that we've come a long way in terms of the information that's available. I might differ a bit in my opinion of where certain provisions should be found. If we start including certain things in acts, maybe the next act looks different, the next act looks different, and there's some inconsistency and perhaps the reporting isn't as, it can make it more complicated. So we might end up with more than one place to go or more than one way to report things. So I do appreciate the members' comments, and we can take it back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Emily Knockleby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is around, again, to do with the wages. It's my understanding that the two large the daycare centres recently updated their wage grids, and I'm just wondering if EC is going to use their numbers in order as like a starting point to minimize any disruption or instability within the sector of employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily Knockleby. Minister.
Thank you. It's still quite early to talk about a starting point for the wage grid. That's going to be one of the items that we work on after the initial items that we want to get through for April 1st of 2023. I can hand it to the Deputy Minister for additional information. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Minister McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the Minister is correct. I think while we're aware that those centre-based programs have implemented a wage grid, in fact, it was the Early Childhood Association during a meeting in December who let me personally know about that and asked about what that would mean for our wage grid. I think at this point it would be hard to determine. I personally have not looked at their approaches and whether that aligns with what our preliminary thinking is. As was mentioned previously, we're looking closely at the various types of regulatory instruments that are being introduced in provinces and territories across the country. So some jurisdictions are looking at grids with 3 tiers, others 4, some looking at creating a specific tier in their grid for daycare directors or managers, things of that nature. So there's a lot of variability there, and that's one of the reasons why we're looking at regulation as the solution, as is the case in other provinces and territories. So I think we'll have to take a look at what those entail and see whether they work for our system as well. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister McDonald. Emily Knockleby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to leave the wages alone for now and ask around, all I keep seeing and hearing about through social media and residents is that the spaces are declining. I belong to the childcare group, and every day there's somebody new posting about looking for a space. I heard recently again that 3-day homes have closed. And many of them do cite this rollout as the reason why they're no longer in operation. So can the minister speak a bit to the state of our daycare here in Yellowknife at the moment, and whether or not the department has done any assessment on the loss of homes of positions or spaces over the last year, and what's being done to accommodate or rebuild those spaces? Thank you.
Thank you, Emily Knockleby. Minister.
Thank you. So I'm not too familiar or intimately familiar with the recent happenings in Yellowknife in terms of openings and closings, but I will say that day homes do often open and they often close. Sometimes day home operators have children who are childcare age, and when those children get older, the day home will cease operation because they no longer need childcare themselves and they move on. I was just in Fort Smith, and I visited 2 childcare facilities there, the town of Fort Smith's and the Métis, and they have dozens of brand new spaces in those facilities. So it is a very fluid market, and I believe the Deputy Minister can probably speak to this, and he can hand it off if the director perhaps has more details. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister Simpson, Deputy Minister McDonald.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think the member talks about some of the Facebook sites and some of the information sharing. ECE certainly monitors closely what is occurring and what some of the public conversation is around space creation and potential closures. And really, we recognize that for a host of reasons, there are challenges that are affecting this sector. So, for example, the current labor market, the tightness, the lack of workers is affecting this sector, as it is others, but it is a significant contributing factor to some of the challenges that center-based programs have. And of course, when there are challenges of that nature, there can be a reduction in spaces available. What we're seeing at the macro level is a continuation of space addition to our sector, to our system in the territory. We're obligated under the Canada-wide agreement to meet a target at the end of the 5-year agreement of 300 net new spaces for the Northwest Territories, with that being about 75 spaces for each individual fiscal year. We've already met those targets for the years in which we've been operating under this agreement, and we think that we'll continue to do so. There is an ebb and flow in each community, and particularly, as the minister mentioned, around family day homes. That's a very unique subset of the sector. As the minister mentioned, I probably could hand it off to Director Comprelian to maybe speak to some specifics about what, through her staff and through our regional offices, are experiencing in terms of family day home closures. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister McDonald. Director Comprelian, I'll pass it over to yourself, but if you have any data on NWT space changes and Yellowknife specific space changes, that would be very helpful to committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. While it's true that there are closures that happen as a course of kind of business and the nature of it, and it's more likely in the family day home world than the center-based programs, because family day homes are individual operators, and there's a variety of reasons, as the minister mentioned, where an individual family day home operator might choose to close and shift to other employment. Centers tend to be the more stable type of program, but we have many long-standing family day homes operating in the territory. And then each year we have some that open and some that close. In any given year, that number fluctuates. So in terms of a trend line, as Deputy Minister McDonald said, we are on target to achieve the net space creation we have in our agreement of 300 spaces by the end of 25-26. And we will be reporting annually on those space creation changes, so you can see the details if there's interest by committee in terms of the reporting. So I think 171 is where we were at in terms of the last number that we were looking at to date in terms of space creation. And net spaces, meaning it takes into account the closures and the new space creation. We have our infrastructure fund that provides that support as well for anyone interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Comprelian. Can you provide the public with an idea of where they can access that information as well, please? Thank you.
We post our, it's okay, Minister? Yeah. We post the annual reports that we are required to provide to Canada. We post those online on our department website, so the public is welcome to have a look both at our action plan and our reports, and all of that is available online.
Thank you very much, Director Comprelian. And just further to that, Minister, are you able to confirm that the goal of 300 additional spaces is solely focused on licensed spaces in the territory and does not take into account unlicensed spaces? Thank you.
That's correct.
Thank you very much. Minister, members, are there any additional questions for the minister today? Okay. With that, Minister, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank yourself and your staff for joining us here this evening. And I'd like to take this opportunity to turn our minds over to presentations that we do have from the public this evening, I would like to invite staff from Education, Culture and Employment to follow along if they want to be able to listen to the presentations this evening, along with the public as well. So thank you, Minister, for your time. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much to committee. I look forward to observing the rest of the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. So committee, we do have 3 speakers who have registered to speak with us tonight. The first is Ms. Patricia Davidson, who is the chair of the NWT Early Childhood Association. The second is Ms. Angela Danielle, who is the advocacy coordinator for the YWCA NWT. And the third is Mr. Ryan Fiquette, the chair of the Yellowknife Daycare Association Board of Directors. So we will start this evening by inviting Ms. Davidson, who is joining us virtually, to start with presentations this evening. So welcome, Ms. Davidson. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, honorable members, Madam Chair, other guests, and the department staff. As I've been introduced, I'm Patricia Davison. I'm the chair of the NWT Early Childhood Association. We are barely a year old, so we're a very new association. We've been working closely with the department and particularly the Deputy Minister and department staff. I want to thank you for this opportunity to share our thoughts on these amendments. We appreciate the work the department staff have put into implementing the GNWT federal agreement. We have some questions about the implementation of the amendments and follow-up action on the amendments. And these are questions that we've raised with the staff and with the Deputy Minister. And so there shouldn't be any surprises, but just so the Standing Committee knows some of the discussions we've been part of. So ECE is a complicated sector. We do not expect the GNWT to understand the details of the day-to-day operations. I mean, that's why we have the board members and administrative staff working in the programs. I'd like to address the amendments one by one and just make some brief comments and perhaps some rhetorical questions regarding each one. So, establishing the NWT certification process and wage grid. So I think we can all agree certification is important in the sector, having qualified staff to implement quality programs. Very important. Having a process by which staff with higher qualifications and experience receive a higher wage is a great retention incentive. It shows that we value the people working in the sector. Our question is, where will the funds come from? On one hand, the sector's revenue is being limited. On the other hand, we're thinking of implementing a pay staff wage grid that some centers and programs may have a difficult time managing. At this point, operators are struggling to find money to train staff, to pay staff a comparable community wage. And I know one of the members talked about a living wage, and we like to talk about a comparable community wage because many of the programs talk about getting staff trained and feeling comfortable in a work environment, and then they go next door to work for more wages or better benefits or benefits that they weren't able to have in the sector. At this point, with the current labor market shortage, how will we ensure the ECE sector has staff moving forward to provide quality programs? Retention is a large issue. How do we find and keep staff without more resources? How do we open more spaces without more staff and resources to maintain the staff? And also, what about benefits to make sure that staff are comfortable staying in the sector? How do we implement and maintain all of this is a question, and it's been a discussion that we've had with the department and that we're working on. The second amendment is increasing inclusion and reporting measures. So, of course, inclusion is important. Working in partnership to ensure children have the best available is a starting process. It takes resources and supports to ensure inclusivity. What additional funds will be available to ensure this is not a simple regulation? In my experience, sometimes there's a regulation, but there's no actions or resources to back it up. So it just sits there and nobody's able to achieve it. So what funds will be available to ensure that there is action. More regulations to follow and implement without resources may actually limit inclusivity. Particularly, for example, if it's identified that a child needs one-on-one staff, how do we manage that with limited resources? The second concern that's come up in this sector is the Privacy Act. What will this reporting be used for? How will it benefit the sector? And what are the anticipated actions? Parents of children with disabilities are often a little leery of providing their personal information when they don't know what it's being used for. They're often afraid of being guinea pigs for no apparent reason. So we have to be really careful around that area. The third point, authorizing cost control regulations. This is the amendment that concerns the NWT Early Childhood Association the most. As I mentioned earlier, we do not expect the GNWT to understand all the details of the day-to-day operation of the programs in the ECE sector. That is the responsibility of the parent boards, the committees, the operators. And we have seen gaps in understanding with the rollout of the GNWT and federal agreement. And we've talked to the department and the deputy minister and the minister about this, and we've tried to work out solutions, and it's a work in progress. One of the examples is basing the staff retention initiative on full-time equivalencies, which is a simple what ratio is required in the room at any given point in time, and it's math around that. In reality, it takes more people to cover the shifts, training time, breaks, when you're open from 7:30 to 6 o'clock in the evening. How do two staff cover all of that? Well, it's impossible. The reality is you need almost 3 staff to do that. And what about family day home operators? What kinds of supports are there for them to ensure that they can also maintain a comparable wage in their operations? Each program is different and has specific ever-changing needs. Programs have dealt with collapsing ceilings, mass exodus of staff, dryers breaking down, boilers issues, frozen pipes, renovations going over budget, hot water tanks blowing up. The list goes on and on. How do we have flexible resources to manage this? Maintaining quality programs, field trips, elder visits, on-the-land trips, everything that makes quality, successful programs in the NWT. We don't want to lose that. We want to keep that and expand on that and grow that. We know the cost is not cheap. So how can we work together to ensure this sector survives and that we're able to offer quality, accessible programming in the communities? The fourth point, protecting the rights of families. Rights of the families are extremely important. We want to ensure families are being treated respectfully. We also need to look at the other aspect of protecting the rights of the ECE professionals to make sure that they're being treated respectfully. So can we implement a process that involves both so that neither party is left behind in this process? Updating language in the Act. This update totally makes sense. It's an important amendment. It's one that we're so glad that's being looked at and addressed. So I've been involved in the sector for many years. Only 25 of those years have been in the NWT. My experience comes from other parts of the country. This is the first time I've been concerned about the impact of decisions at this level. We need to move forward wisely and cautiously. The sector in the NWT is very fragile, and the balance needs to be kept so we can keep moving forward. The NWT Early Childhood Association hopes to continue to work with the GNWT to ensure the sector comes out stronger with better supports for families. It's our hope that these regulations have the actions and resources to make a positive impact on this sector. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Davidson. We really appreciate your time this evening. I would like to turn the floor over to committee members for any questions that anybody has for Ms. Davidson. Questions or even comments. Thank you, Emily Knockleby.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Ms. Davidson for the presentation. And I know we've chatted before. I don't really have questions. I just wanted to comment that to me, it's very important that voices like yourselves, your voice will be involved in this process, and maybe without putting you too much on the spot in a public meeting. I'm just wondering, how are daycare providers feeling about the relationship with ECE going forward, given that there has been some issues around how this is all rolled out? And 100%, if you do not want to answer that, please just tell me so. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily Knockleby. Ms. Davidson?
I'm happy to answer that. I think we definitely had a shaky start, and I think the association and the department worked really hard and closely together to get the next steps of the rollout to work more smoothly, I might say. And I think the more we work together, the stronger it will be, and the stronger the sector will be. And I realize that, this is new for everybody. Like I said, the early childhood sector in the NWT is quite fragile, and it's not strong. It doesn't have a strong voice. The operators haven't had a strong voice. We're fortunate now that the association, right now we have about 34 people or organizations that come together and give input and ideas, and so we're gradually becoming a more focused voice, and working with the GNWT and the department to make the sector stronger is our number one goal.
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. Emily Knockleby?
Thank you for that. And I don't have any further questions. I do appreciate that, and I am quite glad to hear that, and especially given that I still feel there's a little bit of a want to sort of act that none of this that happened over the last year has caused day homes to close, which I literally just heard within this last hour. So I struggle with that, because I find that to be a bit disingenuous. I personally spoke with people who I know closed their homes as a result of this whole rollout. So I guess your comments to me are actually quite encouraging, and I just and I know you will let me know if and the committee, if they don't continue to do so. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily Knockleby. Does anybody else have any additional questions or comments? Emily O'Reilly?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks for the remarks. I don't think I have them in writing. If there's any way that you could share your speaking notes with us, I think that would be helpful. But my question for you is, and I think you were on at the beginning to hear some of the questions that we posed as well. I'm just wondering, the minister described and the deputy minister described what kind of public engagement they intend to undertake in developing the regulations. Is there anything that you would want to flag for us, or that you might want to let us know that you're looking for, or in terms of the public engagement, so we can try to make sure that happens? Thanks.
Thank you, Emily O'Reilly. Ms. Davidson?
Thank you for the question. I think that the public engagement is such an important part, and having the NWT Early Childhood Association involved is a great step. We really, and I mentioned in my speaking points that, we're concerned about the family day home providers as well. And we're looking forward to some of the commitments that might be acted on in the near future to support them. And I think that, just really being aware that there are concerns from the sector and that we're hoping to find solutions. And like I said, the number one is the area that talks about controlling the I'm trying to think of the authorizing of cost control regulations. That's what it was called. That's the part that we're most concerned about. As I mentioned, if you have one part saying we need to support the staff, which we all agree on, there's no question about it. We need to support the staff, we need to support the families. But if there's a cost control placed on programs, then how do they balance all of those challenges I mentioned, plus support the staff to the degree they need to be? And I'm just not sure how that's possible. I'm not sure if that's realistic. And that's, some of the discussions that we've had and we will continue to have in hopes of coming up with some solutions. I hope that answers your question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Ms. Davidson. Emily O'Reilly?
Yeah, no, thanks. I guess I'm just wondering, I'm familiar with the platform that GNWT seems to use, these have your say web pages where there's kind of just like an email listed with a little bit of background information, and people are supposed to submit their comments off into space somewhere, and that somehow the comments, get compiled into these what we heard reports that vary hugely in their level of detail and accuracy, I think. Are you looking for face-to-face meetings? Are you looking for just an opportunity to submit, email comments, an opportunity to actually see the draft regulations and take that back to your membership, time? I just want a little bit more detail of what your kind of expectations might be so that I understand what you're looking for and that we can try to make sure that gets supported. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily O'Reilly. Ms. Davidson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The NWT Association has been very fortunate to have face-to-face meetings with the Deputy Minister on a fairly regular basis. The NWT Early Childhood Association has taken it upon themselves to do some surveys of the sector regarding some of the rollout to get feedback, and have passed it on to the department, and particularly the Deputy Minister and the staff. Virtual meetings have with the association. I've heard that there may be a commitment to do that with the family day home providers, and I'm shall I say, joyously awaiting that, because I think that they have some great input. And even though the association speaks of those concerns that we hear, it would be great because the sector has been separated out a little bit. So it would be good to hear from them as well. As far as the drafts, we have been privy to, the NWT Early Childhood Association has been privy to some of the drafts, and have again, had discussions with the Deputy Minister, and have given some feedback. And the questions, like I said, the questions that I listed this evening are questions that we have had within discussions with the Deputy Minister and the department staff. So we are, shall I say, cautiously hopeful that moving forward, these communications will get even stronger, and the transparency will get even clearer.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Members, are there any additional questions for Ms. Davidson at this time? Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us this evening, Ms. Davidson. We really appreciate you taking the time to make a presentation to committee, and for providing very helpful information as we move forward with our review of the bill. So thank you. Yeah, and you're absolutely welcome, just to be clear, you're absolutely welcome to stay on and listen to the additional presentations if you like. Totally up to you. Thank you so much. Second, for a presentation this evening, we would like to invite Angela Danielle, the Advocacy Coordinator for the YWCA of the NWT, to join us. So thank you. You can sit wherever you're most comfortable. So thank you so much. We really look forward to hearing from you and the YWCA of the NWT. And whenever you're ready, please proceed with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this on? Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to comment on the proposed changes to the Child Daycare Act. The YWCA NWT is encouraged by the GNWT's commitment to improving daycare affordability, availability, quality, and inclusivity across the territory. As a dedicated stakeholder and deliverer of childcare programs, YWCA NWT looks forward to continued engagement in these and all future proposals for improvement of early childcare in the NWT. We note that the proposed changes include a certification process for early childhood educators, a wage grid, and a more robust reporting system. We sincerely hope that creating a more rigorous certification process will also involve increased training and educational support for workers in the field. This will allow early childhood educators and support staff to obtain relevant education that is flexible to their needs. Considerable focus should be placed on training of existing staff to ensure retention in new certification process regime. These staff may need time and flexibility to attain required training to make certification standards. Please note that many people working in the field are in full-time jobs, which means that it will be hard for them to leave their jobs and attend full or part-time schooling. Any training required to meet future certification requirements should be flexible and allow individuals to work without interruption to their existing work schedules. A daunting certification process will likely only cause further staff shortages and the closure of more childcare spaces in the NWT. Part-time and after-school childcare providers often have other jobs or roles and should not have a need to attend certification or training courses. Implementing mandatory certification for all types of childcare workers is unrealistic and will cause many part-time workers to leave the field, creating further staffing problems. YWCA NWT believes that full-time daycare facilities should be considered apart from part-time or after-school childcare programs, as these programs fulfill different needs. Applying the same standards is unrealistic for our after-school program model and others. We agree that inclusion for children with disabilities or exceptionalities is important to the equity in childcare programs. However, our after-school childcare programs do not have the capacity to provide individualized care. Often children with exceptionalities require one-on-one care by providers with specialized training that we cannot support within our part-time work model. This is another reason to separate after-school childcare from full-time childcare and consider regulations or policies that support both types of programming. We are encouraged by the proposal of an increased reporting requirements. However, with the caveat that increasing requirements may also account for increased work for organizations and staff with limited capacity. As we have seen in the rollout of the daycare subsidy, simply providing more funding is insufficient, as childcare programs may need time to recruit and train staff to collect and report the data. Smaller day homes without the capacity to hire are at a disadvantage, as they may have to work increased hours in addition to providing care. Expanding the administrative burden on small programs can cause the programs to become unsustainable. The YWCA NWT hopes that expanding reporting requirements to be made with consultation of the organizations affected directly. We look forward to reviewing a draft census and new funding application as mentioned in due course. Increased reporting raises concerns over privacy for children and their parents. Parents have concerns with sharing their children's personal information already. Additional requirements to share this type of information raises concerns over how this information will be stored and who will have access to it. We would like further clarification on how the Territorial ATIPP Act will apply to childcare organizations. Additionally, we would hope that this information, without personal identifiers, would be appropriately used by professionals that have firsthand knowledge of what working in childcare looks like to make informed policies. YWCA asks for more clarity around the investigation of complaints by parents in the proposed amendments, and we wish to be consulted on these regulations once they are drafted. We are also curious about the proposed wage grid. It presents a particular challenge as both nonprofit and private businesses run most of the early childhood programs affected by these proposed changes. We need to ensure that territorial childcare programs are sustainable. We are concerned about the simultaneous implementation of wage grid and mandatory training for employees who have been working in childcare for a long time. Subsidies need to be available to support their training so they can maintain the same level of pay within the wage grid so as not to create pay inequity in our organization. Further, setting a limit on childcare fees will make it harder on childcare facilities to sustain their business with higher pay and increased administration, even with government subsidies. We agree that childcare needs to be more affordable. However, YWCA and WT would like to note that taking financial pressure off parents in other areas, such as with a rent cap to make housing more affordable, would offset other financial pressures parents feel and help with overall cost of living pressures on families in the territory. The demand for our programs considerably outstrips our capacity. Though running childcare programs is challenging, our staff and board recognize that early childhood education is a crucial social investment in the NWT. And we continue our dedication to children and families, including seeing their best possible outcomes in life. And we look forward to a continued engagement process. Once again, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You had a lot of very important information in your speaking notes. Is it possible for us to get a copy of them? Excellent. I see a thumbs up from the back there, so that's perfect. Thank you so much. Members, are there any questions or comments from members? Emily Knockleby?
Thank you. I sometimes have to think about what I want to actually ask, but other than just sort of sitting here thinking, oh, I hadn't thought about that, I think one of the big ones that I took note of here was, now I am losing my mind. The stuff around certification around the part-time employees and such, and the ability for people to actually be able to take training, even if it is being offered to them. So I think that was a really big one. And then the separation actually of aftercare, after school care versus the daycare. So that isn't a distinction that I think I really considered before. And the fact that a lot of the YWCA employees would be part-time in that job. Maybe they're doing other jobs for the Y, but they're only a couple hours at the time of day. So I guess more just comments that I really appreciate that. I'm always a big fan and supporter of the work that the Y is doing. So I hope that we're able to carry your voice through to the department as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily Knockleby. Would you like the floor back?
Oh, no, thank you.
Thanks much, Ms. Danielle. Emily O'Reilly.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I'll ask you the same question I asked the chair of the Early Childhood Association, and that's, what kind of expectations do you have in terms of how GNWT is going to carry out this engagement, public engagement? Because you asked specifically for engagement on the the wage grid stuff, and maybe one or two areas that I didn't catch in my notes. But so what are you looking for? Like probably face-to-face meetings, opportunity to review proposals, draft regulations. But if you could just describe that a little bit for me so that we can maybe try to make sure that makes its way maybe into committee reports, so that gives the department a heads up as well. Thanks.
Very much, Emily O'Reilly. Ms. Danielle?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we would be open to being a part of every stage of drafting regulations, from getting initial feedback, seeing regulations when they're drafted before they go public, having opportunities to attend meetings like this where we can give our feedback. It affects our day-to-day, and so having our voice heard throughout the process is very important to us. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Members, are there any additional questions or comments? None at this time. I have one. In your speaking notes, you brought up concerns in regards to the complaint process that's taken on a bit more of a consumer regime kind of angle. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more to the concerns that the YWCA and NWT has in regards to that. Thank you.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. From what I've heard from the individuals who are directly running these programs, Currently, there's not a lot of support on our end when a parent complaint is made. So we want to just make sure that with an increased process for parents to make complaints, if those complaints go forward, what supports are going to be available for our staff to make sure that we can continue running our programs in the meantime, and that it's going to concerns are going to be addressed appropriately on both sides so that everyone feels like they are heard. That's what I've heard from my staff, so thank you.
Excellent, thank you. No, that's very helpful. I really appreciate that. So with that, I'd love to say thank you so much for joining us here this evening. I know that especially people in the childcare sector with as you say, multiple jobs and especially frontline staff in an advocacy position, I know that your time is very valuable and there's a lot of us competing for it. So thank you very much for joining us here this evening. And just so that I'm aware, are you comfortable with us also sharing that with the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment in the event that he would like to be able to cross-reference them as well? Yes. Excellent. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. What's that, sorry? Oh, if you want to send them to committees at ntassembly.ca, that would be most appreciated. Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Reid? Excellent. So thank you so much. Members, we now have a third presentation this evening. We have Mr. Ryan Fiquette, who's the chair of the Yellowknife Daycare Association Board of Directors. So Mr. Fiquette, please make yourself comfortable at the witness table there. And then whenever you feel comfortable and you're ready, please go ahead and take the floor. And we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Ready to rock and roll? Zainazi, C. Ryan Fiquette, CA. My name is Ryan Fiquette. I've been involved in the childcare sector during the last 7 years, but have been involved with not-for-profits for more than 2 decades. I've served on more than 50 local, territorial, and national boards and committees in director and chair roles, and have advised more than 100 different boards of organizations on governance best practices as either a consultant or a volunteer here in the NWT. I'm here today in the capacity as someone with a background of more than 10,000 hours in the not-for-profit governance space, including my current role as the board chair of one of the NWT's 2 largest not-for-profit center-based daycare facilities. Wearing both hats as a parent with children in early learning and childcare and as a volunteer director with the Yellowknife Daycare Association, it's great to see the recent attention, recognition, and funding that's coming to the sector through the federal bilateral agreements. We share the government's goal of having a strong childcare sector where kids have safe and high-quality early learning experiences, families feel confident about their childcare, and early childhood educators have a valued role in our communities. I want to draw attention to and share our concerns with the implications of Section 29 Sub 1 Sub 2 and Section 32 Sub 2. This is echoing the concerns previously mentioned by both of the presenters before me. When I serve as a volunteer board member or when I provide orientation and consulting services working with boards, I reiterate that their main role as a board is to make decisions in the best interest of the organization. Some of you may recognize that this is actually the legal test for volunteer directors when their decisions are challenged in the courts. For some additional context, prior to the rollout of the federal subsidy, 1/3 of the Yellowknife Daycare Association's total annual revenue of approximately $2.5 million was provided through core funding from ECE, and the other 2/3 came from monthly fees from the member families. With the proposed changes in these respective legislative sections, a center's revenue would be fixed and entirely determined by the GNWT, as they would restrict the ability of an organization to charge any additional fees to parents other than the child care fees determined by the GNWT, restrict operators from charging fees above the maximum amounts prescribed by the GNWT, and require operators to pay employees a minimum amount, again, set by the GNWT. The small number of centers that provide child care service are all governed as registered societies, and in some cases they are also registered charities, who have boards with legal responsibilities related to the oversight of the organization. Taken together, these sections of the proposed changes to the Child Care Act restrict a board's ability to make decisions about how to manage their organization's finances to such a degree that I believe not-for-profit board of directors would be unable to effectively perform their fiduciary duty to the organization they're serving. A recent example of this challenge just took place with the rollout of the subsidy, where ECE introduced a cap on the amount that organizations could increase staff wages. Only a couple of years ago, you could make more driving a Zamboni than being an early learning and childcare worker. Adjustments to align with the Alternatives North suggested cost of living that is now a few years old, the universal challenges of the ongoing labor shortage, and the pay inequity were required to be addressed, and there's still much work to do in this space. But unfortunately, GNWT has included a cap as part of the subsidy agreements. So moving forward, we are limited in addressing challenges specifically in the area of staff wages. I understand and support efforts to reduce childcare fees for families. I also understand and support efforts to improve early childhood educator staff salaries. I don't think there's any not-for-profit organization involved in the service delivery of childcare that doesn't strive to achieve both of these goals at all times in everything they do. The following statement in the plain language summary for Bill 68 reads as follows. To meet the goal of making childcare more affordable throughout the NWT, additional regulation-making authorities are necessary within the Act to give the Minister permission to establish and implement cost control measures for licensed programs. This is to ensure that government funding is being used for its intended purpose, which is to increase the affordability and accessibility of quality ELCC programming for families. Without such a mechanism, government subsidies may be used for profit rather than to create sustainable and accessible ELCC programming. Without such a mechanism, government subsidies may be used for profit rather than to create sustainable and accessible ELCC programming. ECE currently requires submission of annual financial and in some cases audited statements from all licensed service providers. So such a statement does not reflect the way daycare centers operate towards a revenue neutral outcome each fiscal year. I believe the proposed legislative changes are incongruent with and unacceptable for the current not-for-profit governance structure that currently exists and is how center-based childcare services are being delivered right now. From my perspective as a not-for-profit director, thinking about my governance role and the associated legal obligations and duties, these sections of the proposed changes prevent me from fulfilling my fiduciary duty to my organization. These proposed changes restrict a board of directors' ability to perform their governance duties while simultaneously asking them to manage all of the risk associated with service delivery. I would not participate on a board, nor would I recommend anyone step up to volunteer, where a board is responsible for the risks associated with human resources, facilities and operations management, and most importantly, the safety of children, without the necessary financial decision-making ability to manage that liability. These specific proposed changes are moving the sector towards a situation where those organizations may cease to exist under legislative constraints, the likes of which are typically only seen when the government provides service delivery, such as in health and education. There may be liability implications for the GNWT as well. Good not-for-profit boards transfer liability for service delivery issues to the GNWT in the event of a lawsuit, if it was because of a lack of funding. Given that the board's decision-making is constrained by the GNWT, perhaps the GNWT has explored and is comfortable with that potential risk. I think every jurisdiction in Canada will be grappling with this, and NWT doesn't have to come up with a solution independently. I recognize these proposed changes are towards aligning with the requirements of the federal funding, but I would urge against just forging ahead without working out the implications of these specific sections that in our understanding would have serious and irreparable implications to the delivery of early learning and childcare services in NWT. I think part of working it out means that the GNWT must work closely with not-for-profits delivering childcare in the NWT to establish and reestablish trust. There aren't many of us, and I believe it's reasonable to think that we could come up with a shared plan in short order to avert adding to the existing staffing crisis this sector is currently grappling with. The ultimate vision is to have early learning centers operated by the GNWT as part of a national childcare system. Personally, I could support that if it results in amazing wages and benefits for those folks who deserve it most. But recognizing Minister Simpson's response to MLA Nokelby, that doesn't appear to be the plan. So the proposed changes that I referenced will extinguish the ability of a not-for-profit childcare center to govern and ultimately effectively operate the provision of early childcare and education creating further challenges to an already struggling sector. I'm scared for my kids, my friends who have young kids, the numerous instances of people we all hear about moving out of the territory because they cannot find childcare, and the 300 people, data as of today, couldn't have made that up, on the Yellowknife Daycare Association's waiting list, who I can only assume are losing hope. Please, listen, help us, so that both of these essential services can continue to be delivered and so we can work together to strengthen the sector, because without early learning and childcare, communities come to a halt. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fiquet. We very much appreciate all of the information you provided to us here as well. Are you comfortable providing a copy of your speaking notes to committee?
Sure, in some form, I can do that for sure.
Thank you very much, and I can pass the email address on to yourself as well afterwards. Again, I'd like to turn it over right away to committee members for any questions that anybody might have. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Mr. Fiquet to start off? Question period. Emily Knockleby, thank you.
Thank you. And again, I'm not sure that I have a lot of questions per se, but I find myself through all three presentations just kind of nodding along with what you're saying. And I know we've discussed this before as well. I hear, a department that says that they will listen and that this is something that's going to be done in conjunction with stakeholders and such. But I've also heard many times in the last 3 years, a government saying the very same thing, and then by the time I realize that none of that has happened, something is already being enacted or in front of us, and we don't really have a lot of option for change. So I guess my question, or what I could put back to you, Mr. Fiquet, is how do you see the associations, the YWCA, et cetera, working with the department? Do we need to formalize a working group? Is that something we need to be pushing for? I do hear some encouragement that the relationship has gotten better, but again, is it a matter of people being able to speak, but yet is that actually filtering in? So my question is, how do you see us being effective in getting your voices to the department so that the things you're saying here are going to be taken into account? Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Knockleby. Mr. Fiquet?
I mean, the simple answer is, listen. I don't think there's going to be any shortage of voices and input into the process. I was comforted by Deputy Minister McDonald's comment that even prioritizing which regulations would be done is something that they would like to get feedback from the sector on, because I think, of course, that's really important. You heard the previous presenters mention we're already struggling with staffing crisis, and including and implementing new certifications and training requirements at the beginning is only going to exacerbate that problem and not help anybody. So there's an obvious one to push to the bottom of the list. So I appreciate being asked about the priority of those regulations, and I think that constraining a not-for-profit board's ability to manage the liability and the services that its members demand, those two things don't go together. And I think that we have to, that's not novel in the NWT, that's across Canada that is going to exist, but there's got to be a way to make sure that these organizations have the flexibility and the resources they need to operate effectively, because we're not doing this for the money. Look at our financial statements. That's not why.
Thank you, Mr. Fiquet. Emily Knockleby, do you have a follow-up?
Thank you for that. And and I do appreciate what you're saying. I hadn't thought about the idea or the thought that the Societies Act and such is already governing yourselves in a manner that, is this really necessary to have ECE also then dictating money, and anything around education, there's never enough money, so nobody's really profiting in that regard. I guess my next question would just be more around your role as a board member and that liability. I also have had that in the past where as an engineer I knew some things and had to bring that forward as a board member, and it really gave me cause for concern. So my question has the association had any sort of legal advice or anybody looking at this that has more of that technical kind of background that could say whether or not this is opening up to liabilities and such. You know, I'm just trying to look for ways that maybe we can sort of take this back to the department and say, hey, you know, this is really a concern, and maybe that will get more impetus on what you need versus what the department thinks you need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily Knockleby. Mr. Fiquet?
Yeah, no, great question. I mean, those are the devil is in the details, right? You know, if equipment breaks, if service demands increase from members, there's extra snow this year, as we know from the City of Yellowknife situation, we need to spend more on clearing the snow off the roof. If everything is dictated and controlled by our revenue sources are 100% now dictated by ECE, that's not necessarily the problem. The problem is that what is the flexibility that we have to deal with liability and things as it change? And we all know that the reason not-for-profits exist in the social programming space and sports and others is because they operate more nimbly than government, faster. They can adjust. And so unless the GMC is planning on taking over the service delivery, which sounds like they're not, then and the not-for-profit sector is going to continue to deliver this service, how do those two things coexist? How do you you're taking away the one benefit of the not-for-profit sector, which is allowing them to make decisions to meet the service needs. Because guess what? The board is elected. They do something wrong, the member families vote them out. If the fees are too high, they vote them out. We had to increase our fees 15% before the subsidy because our wages were so low. And we just increased them again, and we hope to be able to increase them again because they're still too low. So those are the kinds of concerns we have when we need to adjust staff wages to be competitive, or we have to deal with facility maintenance or expansion or repairs that are unforeseen. Like, we don't know what we don't know, but we do know that right now, when the member fees are 2/3 of our revenue, it gives us the ability to adapt. And that's what's important to be able to meet the community's needs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fiquet. Emily O'Reilly, the floor is yours.
Yeah, no, thanks. I appreciate the perspective on trying to find some sort of balance between having affordable daycare, but expecting that nonprofit sector is going to deliver the service without the ability to actually manage its own risks or make decisions. So is there a way in which there might be, I don't know, and I'm just trying to think this through, two separate sets of regulations, or one set of regulations that deals with nonprofits versus those daycare facilities that are, I guess, set up for, I don't even know if there are people that try to do this for profit, because if you do, you're probably not in the right business. But okay, so I'm just rambling.
All non-profits.
Yeah, okay.
But you would have a day home versus, correct?
Yeah.
All right, so maybe that's a question. Can you foresee then maybe the need to have two different kinds of regulations here, one for nonprofits and one for day homes, to try to restore a little bit better balance here? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Emily O'Reilly. Mr. Fiquet?
Resisting the urge to comment on that, I'll leave that to the professional legislative drafters. I think what I want to acknowledge is that day homes and daycare centers are entirely different models. One is not-for-profit based and has legal obligations under the Societies Act, and is running very effectively in the Northwest Territories, up and down. Day homes are for-profit models, and they may require their own considerations. Probably they do. We're losing them left, right, and center, and right now they're filling and addressing a need that the community has. I just mentioned that the Yellowknife Daycare Association has 300 kids on the waiting list. That's just our daycare. I'm sure everyone's on the same list all over the place, but that's not even in Inuvik, where the other largest center is based. That's not including the French Daycare. That's not including the two that are operated by the Yellowknife Women's Society, who's not here tonight. So there's a crisis in the sector. We've used that word for a couple of years. We're not joking. We're not dramatizing this. This is real. And the comment about COVID has demonstrated to us that teachers and nurses are leaving their jobs faster than ever, and early childcare workers would, but they don't make enough, and they have to have 2 or 3 jobs. And when everything else stops, they have to keep working, or society stops. So we need a way to fix this, to address this, so that there's flexibility and resourcing. If the GMT wants to look after those things, they need to look after it, and they have to guarantee it in the legislation. Right now, all that we see before us, notwithstanding the good relationships that Patricia mentioned that are being built through John and his team, right now all we see is a legislative restriction, which will shut us down. That's all we see. That's all that's before us. I recognize the devil's in the details and regulations, but governments change, right? We all know that. So how do we not collapse the sector that's already in crisis?
Very much, Mr. Fiquet. Emily O'Reilly, do you have a follow-up question?
I do, Madam Chair, thanks. Yeah, so, okay, maybe you could just tell me a little bit about what kind of expectations then you would have and your board might have around what kind of engagement you want to see on the regulations, especially these cost control regulations, I guess, are probably the key ones. And what kind of flexibility does there need to be within the regulations? But anyways, if you can tell me what expectations you've got around public engagement and the experience that you had, maybe even in terms of public engagement on this bill, the development of the bill, where committee does its own, but did EC&E talk to you guys about this bill even coming forward, and what kind of input did you have in it? So experience with public engagement on the bill and moving forward into the regulations. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Emily O'Reilly. Mr. Fiquet?
The answer to your second question is I don't know off the top of my head. I can tell you that I have been very involved alongside Patricia with ECE for the last couple of years, and it may or may not have come before us. I can't comment. I can't recall. But what I can say moving forward is that, like any public service, the hope, the dream is that meaningful consultation according to current case law will take place. Real concerns will be addressed or accommodated or dealt with in a way that is meaningful. So again, I appreciate Deputy Minister McDonald's comments about asking us which regulations are first. We're just flagging that the cost control regulations themselves, that principle, is problematic from a governance perspective. How can boards exist if they can't make decisions regarding financial oversight and management? That doesn't jive.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fiquet. Members, are there any additional questions at this time? I'd like to ask one question just to kind of understand a little bit more about maybe potential solutions. So if my understanding is well, so the cost increase cap of 2.3%, and then which is, that is in stone at this point with ECE. And then with the, moving forward, a wage grid, which would be in stone in regulations within the next kind of 18 months, so to speak, or where are we at now? So 14 months. So that kind of really does pigeonhole your organization as far as dollars in. And then when we kind of consider that is in stone, based on the way that they're setting this up right now, and then looking at solutions and your comment about kind of a legislated way forward that protects the viability of childcare centers. Are you looking at solutions like some type of a legislated commitment for the government to cover shortfalls for the wage grid, or do you have kind of solutions like that your board has been playing with of how you would like this to look given the parameters that the government has already laid out? Thank you.
Merci for the question. 2 To be clear, this actually, I mean, I know it's the second reading, but this kind of caught us by surprise. To be honest, I think November 30th was when it came out, and I haven't had much time over the Christmas holidays and with everything else going on with the subsidy funding, so haven't discussed this fulsomely, but your question is directly linked to a letter that a collection of not-for-profit organizations sent to Premier Cochrane at the end of October, AVENS, YWCA, Life Women's Society, Home Base, regarding the problems with funding agreements coming from the GWT to the not-for-profit sector, specifically related to what you asked about evergreening for infrastructure needs, longer-term funding agreements to reduce the administrative burden and reporting associated. So while we fully support higher quality education and whatever reporting we need to help the GWT with to get the money into the sector from the feds, okay, but not at a cost that's going to collapse the sector, right? So how do we do that? And so that letter that was sent to Premier Cochrane's office was literally about that. It was like, we need the GWT to take a different approach funding not-for-profits. It is different. This sector exists in every space and delivers so many different services. So right now, something the GWT can do to help is look at that letter, look at those 5 bullets that were in that letter, and try to reflect those as best they can in all agreements with all the not-for-profit organizations that can deliver these services more nimbly and on the ground, because obviously the GWT can't do everything. We know that, right? That's not realistic. So I think those are some of the solutions that I would point to. And I don't know, again, I would leave it to the professionals and resist the urge to give my opinion and how the best way to implement that and affect that change.
Thank you very much. So I'm in a position where I've seen the letter. I don't know that the letter has been shared publicly. Is that something that you are willing to share on a public basis with committee, or would you rather keep that private at this time?
I would probably have to ask the permission of the other organizations who signed on to that letter. My guess would be it would be okay to release, but I would have to check in with them.
No, thank you for that. And just further comment to the NWT and its relationship with not-for-profit organizations. And, you know, we speak a lot in all of our committee meetings about non-government organizations, NGOs, and our territory is incredibly reliant on the frontline work that is done by NGOs across the territory. And it's not just Yellowknife, it's the entire NWT. And so a huge thank you to the work that people like yourself and like the 2 people sitting at the back of the room, Ms. Danielle and Ms. Reed as well, our territory, and Ms. Davidson on the screen, thank you. Our territory could not function without the work that is done every single day with especially some of our most marginalized and vulnerable residents, and so thank you very much. I'd also like to take this time to say thank you for the time that all of you gave us this evening with your presentations and your information for committee. We really need this information and this time with you to be able to do good work. So I really want to say a huge thank you for your time this evening. That's it. With that, committee members, so we don't have any more witnesses either online or in the room with us this evening. So we have now concluded the public hearing portion of this evening. So I'd like to take a moment really to thank everybody who not only spoke this evening, but took the time to also listen in from the public to stay informed and then potentially add information. I'd like to let people know that the submission period for this is not closed. So if anybody is listening this evening and would like to be able to add information in, they are absolutely welcome to send information in to the email address is committees@ntassembly.ca. And so thank you to everyone for joining us both online and in person here this evening. The deadline for submissions is 5 p.m. on January 16th. And if you do have any questions about how to make a submission, please reach out to your MLA or any of the MLAs you see sitting here this evening or any of our staff. And the email address is the same, which is committees@ntassembly.ca. So we will now end the public portion of our meeting this evening. And I'd like to ask a member to please put us in camera. Thank you very much, MLA Knockleby, and thank you everyone for joining us here this evening. Thank you.